Today is somewhat transitional. We're moving from the discussion of imagination and imaginative understanding to personal identity, the nature of the self. What makes it the case that you now are the same person that you were when you were 5? What makes it the case that you're the same person that you will be in 10 years' time? And eventually we'll be looking at the concern to survive. Wanting to survive seems to be like one of the most basic human motivations. The great law of sentient beings without which all creatures would perish. But what is the rationale for that? Can we justify the concern to survive? And what is it anyway? And we'll look at some arguments that say your concern with yourself is something different to the concern to survive. So we'll be looking at some really basic human motivations there. We'll start next time. So what's next time? What day is it? Wednesday. So next time is Friday, right? So on Friday we'll look at John Locke's Of Identity and Diversity. So we're back in the Perry collection. That's a little bit difficult. So take your time. As usual, when it's difficult, it's better to take your time in a small bit and get that straight than rush through. And I'll try and break the ice on it anyhow next time. But there have been something like 300 years now of discussion of personal identity. And it all comes from two papers. One is an example Locke gives in this paper called The Prince and the Cobbler. So if you're skimming through, look at where he talks about princes and cobblers in this one. And there's another example that's due to Bernard Williams that came out in the 1950s that we'll look at on Monday. And these two examples between them drive the thousands and thousands of articles and books that have been written on personal identity. So that's for next time. Today is a little bit more low-key and technical. Just as imaginative understanding of the future seems to be important, that was really the point of Laurie Paul's book. Imaginative understanding of the future seems to be really important for thinking about your future plans and activities. Memory seems to be really key to our thinking about the past and to our thinking about the past self. And so it's going to be important when we're thinking about the identity of the self. So it seems like a good idea just to have this one session where we just look directly at how you think about what memory is. And in particular, your memory of particular past events. We often use memory in a very general way to mean something like learning. Now, being able to learn and not forget is really pervasive. Practically any animal is capable of learning. A decapitated cockroach will learn. You don't need very much in the way of fancy cognition to be able to learn. But humans, we seem to be able to think about particular episodes in our own past lives. That's very important to us. There are general findings that as you get older, your ability to remember particular past events from your life greatly increases. You get much easier access to memories of your earlier life, to where you get the old boy sitting by the fire, mumbling over the good old days as he's absolutely overwhelmed by these memories from earlier life. They're very important to people, these memories from earlier life. And they seem to be very important for our conception of the self, for who we are. So just as a kind of exercise, suppose we start out thinking about patients who are not able to lay down memories of particular past events. This is H.M., perhaps the most famous patient who, I can't remember how long it was certainly over 10 years, maybe even over 20, was unable to form any memories of new events. An intelligent, likable, engaging man, by all accounts. In some sense, he learned. If he practiced doing a maze on one day, then the next day he would have no memory of having done the maze the previous day, but his performance in the maze would gradually improve. There's a famous case of a patient with this kind of amnesia. Her surgeon once shook hands with her wearing one of these buzzer rings that give you a shock when you shake hands with the person wearing it. And so she shook hands with him. The buzzer gave her a shock. The next day, of course, she had no memory of that event, but she refused to shake hands with him. She said, people sometimes have things hidden in their hands. So the kind of memory we're focusing on is, I guess it's sometimes called episodic memory, maybe autobiographical memory, where you're remembering particular events from your past life. So someone with anterograde amnesia can remember everything before a particular time, before the car crash, before they got the head injury. But since the car crash, since they got the head injury, they can't lay down any new memories, any new episodic or event memories. So I just want to start out with one question. I don't think there has been any such case, but suppose you had someone who was born with anterograde amnesia. Suppose you had someone who never has had the ability to lay down any memories of particular events. They're intelligent, they can speak the language, but they have no memory of any past events. Would such a person... On the day, could he lay down memories? No, he would not remember that he'd eggs for breakfast on that day. Yeah, there's nothing was being laid down, even in the short term. Yeah, and you could get through eating the meal, if you see what I mean, but not remember it. Yeah, even shortly afterwards. Yeah. Yes. Well, why wouldn't they? What I mean is, if you take that thing about the buzzer, yeah? Well, how do you learn a language anyway? I want to explain to you what red means. And I say, look, this is red, that's red, that's red, that's red. After a bit, you say, oh yeah, I see. So that one's red, and that one's red, and that one's not red. That's language learning, right? GSI? Something like that is what happens in language learning, right? So a patient like this could learn to ride a bike, for example. You can learn to ride a bicycle even though you don't have memories of any particular events. Or, as I said, HM could learn to do a maze. Yeah? So here you've just got another skill, learning which things to call red and which things not to call red. So presumably you could do that even if you don't remember any particular past events. It becomes intuitive, just the way it does for any of us. Yeah. You just say this is red, and someone says, "Well, why do you call that red?" Well, I don't know. Because it is red. There's not much more to say than that. It can happen sometimes that when you're asked, "Is this Wedgwood blue?" What you do is you remember a particular episode where someone showed you some Wedgwood blue. You see, and you say, "Oh, yes, like that." That does happen sometimes. These patients obviously wouldn't be able to do that. Yeah. But that's okay. That seems like it helps a bit when you're learning a language, but we don't usually use it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. Though it takes some funny forms. I don't know if it was HM that did this, but there was one occasion of a patient whose consultant was leaving after a therapeutic interview, and the patient said, wait a minute, there's something else, and he looked for the note where he'd written down what he was going to ask, and in the note it said, ask the doctor if my memory is getting any better. There's some sense in which the patient has insight into what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Yeah. Well, you wouldn't remember. They wouldn't be remembering the particular incidents of riding a bike, but they can have factual memory. Yes. Well, just as with your, I mean, if you do know how to ride a bike, then when you look at riding a bike, when you look at a bike, you just have the sense of ease and command. Well, perhaps that's pitching it a bit strongly for me, but a willingness to have a go anyway. You see what I mean? So, yes. Yeah. Yes. Well, you could take someone after an accident, actually, and say to them, do you know how to ride a bike? And they might say, I don't know, I'll have a shot. Yeah, and then they'll find out by trying. It is a bit different with language. You know, if you say to me, can you speak Portuguese? And I say, well, I don't know, I'll have a go. I'll try. It seems like a different case. Yeah, that way. But just ordinarily, just unreflectively speaking, I mean, unreflectively using the language like you and I are doing right now, you're not thinking the whole time, oh, can I really do this? Yes. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that would be very similar. That would be exactly analogous. That's the kind of thing I have in mind. Yeah. You just find that you can do it. Yeah. Okay? So suppose someone had this from birth. My question is, what do you think? Would they have any concept of the past? They'd be able to learn language, as we've just been discussing. They could be very smart. Wouldn't they be a little bit like, remember Mary? Never saw the colours. This would be like kind of like Mary for the past. There the past is, sepia toned, all behind her. Did she but know of it? Yeah? But regular Mary doesn't even have the concept of the colours, right? She doesn't know that there is such a thing as colour. She doesn't know what it is. So this amnesic Mary, presumably, does she even know that there is such a thing as the past? I suppose that our born amnesic Mary gets the concept, gets the ability to remember particular past events. Suppose suddenly it all comes flooding in on her, just like our colour Mary stepping from the room. Is she going to learn anything? Well, there is that tender experience of remembering a rose from long ago. So she'll be able to do that. She'll be able to know about the rose from long ago in a way she didn't before. But presumably, is this right? She's going to learn that there is such a thing as the past. I mean, it's not just that colour Mary learns about the colours of particular objects. It's that she learns what colour in general is. She learns this generic thing. So presumably, if amnesic Mary suddenly gets experiences of the past, she'll be learning not just about particular past things, but the generic thing, that there is such a thing as the past at all. So, I mean, what's your... I find this really puzzling. If you got someone born with this kind of amnesia, and then they acquire memory for particular events, then, okay, they can now hold on to their thoughts about particular past events, but I guess they're also learning that there is such a thing as the past. Is that right? Can you put your hand on me? Oh, yeah, of course. if you knew that there was a past, and you knew that at one point you had been free, you could say, my God, I don't remember a thing. Yeah. But what I wonder is, how would you know that there was such a thing as the past in the first place? You see what I mean? You could say, oh, well, Mary could talk, could use words. Colour Mary could use words for colours. In some sense, you could learn to say these words, but it would be just empty talk. She wouldn't know what any of these words meant. Yeah. So I guess someone like this could be drilled in the use of words about the past, but it would just be empty talk. That's what I'm wondering anyway. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I had to grow somehow. Yeah, so you would get the concept of the past in this very general theoretical way. Yeah. Yeah, well, this is what really gets me about this. Colour Mary could know in a general structural way that there is this dimension of objects, namely colour, that the colour space has a particular kind of structure. Yeah. But it's all kind of theoretical. She doesn't really know what the colours are. She knows there is such a dimension in a kind of mathematical way. She knows there is such a dimension, but she doesn't know what any of it means. She doesn't understand which dimension this is. It just has a particular mathematical structure. All the colours are ordered in. So you could know maybe that there is a dimension in which, say, people can be ordered. You and I, the small child, can all be ordered, yeah, in that dimension. But the past, she's not going to have any conception of, except in the most abstract, schematic way. Yep. Yeah, well, what I was suggesting was no to the second thing. That it's not like learning how to ride a bike. That you have to have the experience in order to know what it is. To the first thing, so far as I know, there's always more going on than I know about. But so far as I know, there are no cases of children with anterograde amnesia. Or at any rate, I don't know of any cases. It tends to be people getting head injuries or something like that later in life. Well, these are people in their 20s, 30s who are getting it. They speak English perfectly well. They know what it's just as if you or I lose colour vision. Yeah, if we were moved into a black and white environment, then we'd still know that there was such a thing as colour. We could just say, well, how strange, I'm not getting knowledge of the colours of the things around me. And similarly for these people, for the actual patients, they know perfectly well there is such a thing as the past. They just don't know what's went on in it. Can you put? I'm really curious because this is something that I'm just sharing my agony with you. This is something that puzzles me very much. Can you put your hand up if you share my sense that if you didn't have memories of particular past events, then you wouldn't even have the concept of the past? And if your intuition is the other way? Oh, how interesting, okay. And if you have no idea what the question is? Okay, yeah. That's very interesting, okay, yeah. Yeah, they could use those words, they could tell you, but what I wonder is, wouldn't it be like someone telling Mary, oh, look, these are beautiful red tulips, while she's in her black and white room? She could say, ah, yes, beautiful red tulips, how wonderful. you see what I mean? It wouldn't mean anything. She wouldn't know what you meant. She could accept that the words were what you said was correct without understanding what it meant. Yeah. Okay, the thing is, if like most of you, unlike me, you have that sense that you can't have the concept of the past unless you have some experience in the past, I guess the next question is, why isn't it like that for the future? We don't actually have experiences of the future, right? And of course, some people do, right? Some people claim to. You have a far-off look and you stare and you say, the Third World War is coming, and so on. I can see the soldiers, but that's not the usual case. Most of us don't really have, right? Most of us don't really have that kind of thing. But we do have the concept of the future. So if you need the experience of the past in order to have the concept of the past, why don't you need experience of the future in order to have the concept of the future? Yes? Projecting into the future, yeah. But how could you do that unless you already knew what the future was? Yes. Yeah. Okay, no, that's interesting. That connects really to the stuff about imaginative choice. Yeah, where you project these future things. Yep. Well, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Right. So once you've got the concept of the past, you can bootstrap. Right. So to have the concept of the future, you've got to have the concept of the past, and then you get so you don't need the experience of the future because you're actually relying ultimately on your concept of the past. Okay, that's an interesting possibility. Next. I can't remember who was next. Yep. Was it you? Yes. I think it was you, yeah. Can you see that louder? Oh, right. Okay. No, that's a very interesting possibility. And there was some, yeah. Yes. Okay, so the concept of the past is more basic than the concept of the future. That's what you're all saying. Yeah, you're saying it's a somewhat more complicated version, but it's the same basic idea. Is that right? That. Yeah. Yep. It's just like what? Yeah. Yes, right. Yeah. Okay, yes, okay. Okay, very good. Yeah. Okay, so you can say the concept of the past is kind of structural anyhow. Yeah. And it's just that we can fill it in one way and the patient can't fill it in with theirs. Yeah. Okay. Okay, very good. That's a quite different idea, right? That just rejects what I was saying about the past depending on memory, the concept of the past depending on memory, and says all the past, all any of these temporal things is this kind of abstract structure, and memory just fills it in. The abstract structure could say that you could have that. Yeah, I agree. That's a quite different line to what everyone else was saying, but I agree that's also interesting. Did you have a question? So there was someone else over here, and I forgot who it was. Oh, sorry. Oh, you're saying no. Okay, right. Oh, yes. Right. The question is what comes into that business of the experience of transforming. I think that's very plausible what you're saying. But in the face of it, your experience of transforming is remembering that a moment ago it was different, Now I've transformed into something else from what I was a moment ago. But and to have that, you're going to need the memory. Yep. Okay. Well, with that. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Right. Okay. Okay, no, that's very interesting, and I think waking up is actually a really interesting phenomenon, because one of the, I mean, it's always very difficult, right? But when you do it, something that happens is that you remember the events of the previous day, and it's just obvious to you that all this happened yesterday. You know, it didn't happen just a moment ago. I mean, it can happen sometimes. You just thought you have a nap or something, and you just, yeah. Anyway, and it only seems like a moment. But usually, you wake up, and it's perfectly obvious that this happened a day before the night time, if you see what I mean. And I don't know how you do that. You know, do you do some calculation? Do you figure it out when all this must have happened? Muscle memory. Well, it depends what you were doing. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's a really interesting set of possibilities. There could be that kind of. Okay, one last one. I'm sorry, I don't want to stay too long on anyone, but. Right. Is that right? So you get the Rip Van Winkle thing of thinking it was just yesterday. That doesn't actually happen. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, these are all interesting ideas. We should pursue them more maybe in a later session. Okay, good. Okay. Okay, so let's move on into Martin and Deutscher. There's a basic issue about event memory. There is another puzzling one that I just want to mention here, because sometimes when we were talking about this, people shift from one conception to another. One way of thinking of memory for particular events is that the basic unit has to do with language. It's the narrative. It's the story that you can tell of what happened on a particular occasion. Another way of thinking of it is that the basic unit of event memory is the experience, your image of the past event. These are two different ways of thinking of it. On one picture, if you think language is the basic thing, being able to say what happened in the past event, then any imagery you might have is just like a kind of illustration. It's just a picture you give yourself to accompany the narrative. On the other hand, you might think, no, the experiences of the past, that's the core thing in episodic memory. And any narrative you have is just like a caption, like the caption for a painting. It's not really the key thing. The key thing is the painting itself. So anyhow, I just want to mention that and then move on. Here's Martin and Deutscher's definition of event memory. So here's the key thing. Here's what they say an event memory is. Within certain limits of memory, within certain limits of accuracy, you represent the past thing. So you can say what it is, or you get an image of it, or they give this nice example of a painter who paints a scene that happened 10 years ago, and doesn't even realize that he's doing that. But someone who recognizes this scene can say, no, you're remembering that moment in the shipyard or whatever it was. So if you're going to remember a past event, you've got to have some kind of representation of it, whether it's an image or a narrative or a painting or whatever. And if the thing you're remembering was public, then, if it was something that many people could observe, then you had to observe it. And on the other hand, if it was a headache or something just going on inside your mind, then you had to be the one who had it. So if it's event memory, it's got to be representing it, and you had to have been there at the time. And finally, and this is the one we're going to focus on today, these other two things are important too, and we'll come back to them. But your past experience of the thing had to be operative in producing a state or successive states that produce the representation. So you have the current representation because of your past experience. Now, Jaspers, we talked about many times, you've got this notion of understanding the causation in someone else's mind genetically by empathy. Actually, can you just put up your hand? Does the name Severus Snape mean anything to you? Put up your hand if the name does mean something to you. Okay, and if it doesn't? Okay, well, for those of you who it doesn't mean something to, you'll just have to take my word for it. This is kind of a spoiler, but it's not a big spoiler, what I'm going to say. Okay, so Severus is, as you will recall, often mean to Harry Potter. Yes? Is that right? Oh, okay, right. And then there's this moment with I never know how you pronounce this, the pensieve, is that pensieve? Okay, when we discover what Snape's earlier perceptions were. And here we see Harry's father sending the young Snape flying into a tree or whatever it was, right? Right? Bullying him. And now we see what Snape's earlier perceptions were. And then you understand, well, what do you do here? You sink yourself into the psychic situation of the young Snape. And then you understand genetically by empathy how from this earlier perception of Snape of the cruel twist in Harry's father's mouth as he sent him flying, how from that you understand genetically by empathy how Snape became the bitter, twisted individual he is today. Is that a correct summing up? Yeah. So there you're understanding how memory happens there in that Jaspers way. You don't need any physiological understanding. You don't even need to know that there is such a thing as a brain here, right, in order to understand what was going on. So you're understanding the causation here just by sinking into the psychic situation of the earlier person, understanding what they perceived, and then that gives you what their current memories must be. So that's a first passive causation in memory. You don't have memory of a particular past event unless your observation of the past event is what caused you to have your current representation. But then the idea is, once you have that, that's memory. So we just defined memory. Okay? You got a representation, you observed the past event. The reason, the cause of you having the present representation is that the past event happened. Bingo. Okay. Yes? Could I put it in simpler words? Okay, let me try. Okay, you can you can think about the past thing. That's all right? No? Okay, you can think about the past thing. The past thing happened, and you saw it. How about that? And the reason you can think about the past thing is that you saw it. You seeing the past thing back then caused you to be thinking about it now. If that's what's going on, that's memory. Yes? Is it what? Yeah. Okay. At this point, I'm not trying to prove there's a past. That's a very difficult. That's the next level, right? We'll leave that till a future class, right? For the moment, we're just taking it that there is a past, and we're saying, given that there's a past, when can someone be said to be remembering it? Yep. You're asking a more advanced question. Yeah. Okay, but I mean, we could have that as an exercise. I mean, how do you know that the entire universe, including all your apparent memories and all the fossils and all that, right? How do you know, and all the small children and all the old men, how do you know that all that stuff did not come into existence in the last 5 minutes? Okay, that's the exercise for next time. Okay? Good question. Everyone's glad you heard that. Right. Okay. Okay, so is that plain enough what the definition is? Yeah. And one interesting thing about this is that notion of causation here. I said on the face of it that fits with Jasper's, but a point that Martin and Deutscher make is sometimes you need to be nudged to remember something. Sometimes you've got to be prompted to remember something. Right? Someone's saying to you, you remember what happened, you remember that guy we met yesterday? And you need some pushing to remember it. Sometimes you form the present representation, not just because you had the past experience, but because you were nudged into having it. You were prompted. But of course, it's not going to be memory if it was only the prompting that was doing it. If someone says to you, remember that man we met yesterday, he was wearing a hat and smoking a cigar, and you say, oh yes, smoking a hat and smoking a cigar and smoking a cigar and wearing a hat, then if you got that only because of the prompting, then that's not remembering, right? So what does it take? Well, Martin and Deutscher try this, and they say, suppose you call it a complete prompting, and you say a prompting's complete if there's no more to your memory than the prompting supplied. And usually, if you say wearing a hat and smoking a cigar, and you say, oh yeah, I remember that guy, then you can say more about him than that. But if you can't say any more than that, or if you say, then if you can't say any more than that, maybe that's what it takes for it not to be a memory. And if the prompting had to be complete, then it's not really, strictly speaking, memory. But there is. Do you see what I mean? If you can go beyond what it says in the prompting, then it's memory. If you can't go beyond what it says in the prompting, then it's not memory. That's the idea. That can't be right. Here's an example of Gareth Evans's. Suppose that the speaker and the audience, suppose that you have, did that make sense? Pause me if that didn't make sense. It will make more sense in just a second. After I give this example, it will make complete sense. Suppose you have two people, S and A, who were in the habit of going hunting together in their youth. On one of their hunting trips, they saw a dazzlingly beautiful bird perched in a pine tree. Years later, the speaker may say, surely you remember a hunting trip years ago. We saw on a pine tree a magnificent bird. And the speaker might be able to indicate a very similar bird, perhaps in a photograph or in the wild. So this is thought to be the kind of thing that S has in mind. Right? So the speaker produces the photograph, shows the bird. This is actually called the magnificent bird of paradise. That's his name. So that's thought to be the kind of thing that the speaker has in mind. Right? So he's trying to jog the hearer's memory. Remember that bird we saw on the hunting trip, and describes it very fully. Now, the listener, knowing that the speaker's trustworthy, was going to believe all this, say, okay, I take your word for it. It did look just like that. And of course they'll be prepared to bring that belief that the speaker's trustworthy to bear. But You can't be said to understand the remark, remember that bird, that magnificent bird. You can't be said to understand that remark until you remember the bird. So suppose it's you. You're having this magnificent bird described to you. You're having photographs of it shown to you. You formed a very vivid, detailed image of it, but you still don't remember. You don't remember at all. But then it might happen quite suddenly. You say, aha, now I remember. And then once you remember, you can say, oh, that bird. It makes a big difference subjectively when you say, aha, now I remember. But the thing is, if the prompting was very complete, if you got a very rich description with photographs and all of the original event, there might not be any more for you to remember after that. As Evan says, there may be no difference in the content of what you believe before and after the flash of recollection. So before the flash, this is what you have in your mind on the left. Before the flash of recollection, the other person is just telling you there was this beautiful bird that looked like that. You've got all that image in your mind. And then you say, aha, now I remember. Now I get it. Now I know which bird you're talking about. But there may be no change to the content of your picture. I mean, I don't know if you can see this, but if you look very carefully here at the before and after, there is really no difference whatever. You see what I mean? The image before you say, aha, now I remember, is just the same as the image after you say, aha, now I remember. So what's the difference? How do you explain what happened there? Yep. A feeling. Yep. Yes, that's right. That's right. And suppose at the time you felt an intense melancholy, you thought, that bird will be dead soon, just as all of us must pass. Yeah, and your friend can say to you, I remember at the time you felt this intense melancholy, and so on. Yeah, and so you that's your image in the left, and you say, yes, that melancholy. Yeah, that can all be factored in to the before. Yeah, but still there's a difference when you say, aha, now I remember. So the question is, what is that difference? How do you explain that distinction between the case in which you only have the later representation because of the prompting? You don't remember at all. You just formed the image because what the other person told you was so rich. On the case in which you did remember, but your memory could only be triggered by a very rich prompting. How do you explain what that distinction comes to? That's the basic thing that Marston and Deutscher are discussing towards the end of that long paper. And what they suggest is that to understand this, what's going on in memory, we need the idea of a memory trace. They say, suppose that what happened was that you had a past experience that put you into a suggestible state. That made you very likely to form representations in response to promptings. That wouldn't be memory. But once you accept that memory is causal, you've also got to accept the idea of a memory trace. The picture that we ordinarily have, you and I and everyone else who talks about memory for particular events, the picture that we ordinarily have of what's going on in memory is that in your initial observation of the world reaches in and stamps in your brain an impression, a trace of the scene, some kind of structural analogue of the scene. And then what happens later when you're getting your memory jogged, before and after here, is that before, the trace is not being activated. After, the trace is activated. Right? That's the difference between remembering and not remembering. That in remembering, in true remembering, the trace in your brain gets fired up. The trace being a structural analogue of the external scene at the time. I mean, that notion of a structural analogue is, you don't need some fancy physiology to understand it. Martin and Deutscher say people can understand the general requirements for a memory trace, though they have little or no idea of the specific nature of the trace. They can rely on as simple an explanation as that of a print of a coin in wax. So in the wax of your brain, when you observed the scene, the world reached in and impressed itself on your brain, and then that got activated. Or you could think about the grooves in a gramophone record. And the state or set of states produced by the past experience must constitute a structural analogue of the thing remembered to the extent to which you can accurately represent the thing. Okay. So in order to have the idea of the causation that runs from the past observation to the present recollection, is not enough to have this Jaspers thing. It's not enough that you just sink into the psychic state of the other and understand genetically by empathy how the present states arise from the past state. We have this idea of the trace in your brain that's being laid down when you observe the world. Okay. So that's the causation involved in memory. Is that plain as day? Put up your hand if that's plain as day. Boy. Okay, maybe we'll go over this a little bit next time. Yes? Yeah. There could be a causal link, yeah, without any memory trace. For example, suppose at the time I saw the thing, I told you about it, yep, and then years later you tell me about it, yep. Then there's a causal link between the past event, between my observing the past event, going through you, and now to my current representation, yeah. But I still don't remember. Yeah. You might say, oh, well, that went through another person. But suppose it went via tape recorder. It might be that I just lay it down on a tape recorder and then I play the tape back and I form a vivid image of exactly what happened then. That's still not memory, even though it was caused by the past event going through the tape recorder. You might say, well, the tape recorder's outside the skin. Okay, make the tape recorder smaller and plant it inside your skin, right? And then dictate into it as the event's happening, yeah. And then play it back years later. You still don't remember, yeah. So causal connections between the past event, between your observation of the past event and your current recollection, don't constitute memory unless there's a central trace being fired up. Okay, I understand that at the moment the importance of this point might not be very clear, but I hope it will become clear next time when we look at the identity of the self. It matters very much for the identity of the self. Okay, thanks guys.